very good morning. This is what television news is currently running with this hour. Gauteng Public Order Policing Head Colonel David Hlanganani Makhubele was stabbed to death in Turfontein last night. Now, Makhubele previously provided a statement to the Marikana Commission. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta has vowed to respond in the severest ways possible to the Al-Shabaab militant attack on the Garissa University. Let's now have a look at other stories that are making headlines on other media platforms. Our SABC Radio Bulletins is currently running with the story.
Top stories: a call for stiffer sentences for police killers and concerns about German air safety not new. A very good morning to you. I'm Anne Musa.
And SABC News Online is also leading with the following this hour. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to another exciting edition of Media Monitor and welcoming us into your homes. Now, Media Monitor is a platform where we discuss what makes news and why some issues have very little social impact, while others a humongous impact. Now, this Sunday, as we always do, we intend to deepen your understanding of the role of the media in our democracy, while also creating more awareness among TV viewers, radio listeners, newspaper readers, as well as users of news websites and social media. To be part of our discussions, you can call us on the following numbers. It's +2711 714 6843, 714 6847, or 714 6857, or alternatively interact with us on Twitter at SA Media Monitor. A very, very good morning to you. Well, let's welcome our guests this morning. We welcome Stephen Friedman, a political analyst, and Mr. Dominic Mahlangu, the deputy editor of The Times. Gentlemen, a very good morning to both of you. Thank you for being here with us on Media Monitor.
Morning.
All right, gentlemen, let's have a look at those newspapers making headlines today. And there it is, of course, it is the Sunday Independent, and the headline reads, "Inside Kenya's Varsity of Death." The Weekend Argus, boozy Cape kids. The City Press, the pilgrimage to Moria City, going north to find God. And of course, the Sunday Tribune, 7 new murks for king's wives. And the Sunday Times, Quecher killed Lolly, dying mobster. Let's look at other headlines across Africa now. Nigeria, the Sunday Trust says Katsina, Jigawa, Lagos reverse battlegrounds. Zimbabwe Sunday Mail, government scraps allowances for chief executives. All right, well, gentlemen, let's start by looking at the Sunday Times. A very big headline there. It says, Quecher killed Lolly, now dying mobster. Shocking twist in the Lolly Jackson murder. Once again, George Luca now claims that Quecher actually shot Jackson after a 740,000 rand dispute. Panel, the never-ending twists in this story. The accused trigger man is actually accusing somebody else now. What do you make of the story, Prof?
Well, Alicia, I think we need to bear in mind that everybody involved in this story is a criminal of some sort. Therefore, to try to believe what they're saying is a bit difficult. I think we have courts in this country for a reason, and presumably, hopefully, at some point, the courts will tell us what really happened. But, you know, when you're dealing with one hired gunman versus, you know, a guy who was running a brothel, etc., it's very difficult to work out who's telling the truth.
Dominic, your views?
My take is that, a dying man will say anything, will certainly say anything. And, you know, when I saw the story, I simply said, here we go again. I mean, why did he not say, the statement while he was still fit and proper? I mean, the state had to get him back into the country. But now that is allegedly facing death, because of in this country, we must always say allegedly, because of there have been some individuals who will say that he's on the verge of dying. And 4 or 5 years later, they are still alive. So we don't know whether he's dying or not dying. But such a statement coming from him is rich. Yeah.
Doesn't this remind you of the actual gunman in the other trial, of course, in the Annie Devani murder trial, where the gunman actually was saying in his deathbed that he actually was the triggerman, Professor?
Well, once again, we're dealing with people who are criminals, etc. I think Dominic's right. People say all sorts of things when they think they're facing death. I'm just amused because, with respect, I mean, this reads like the kind of headlines you used to read in America in the 1920s and stuff like that. So we seem to be going back to that kind of journalism.
I wasn't around, Prof, so I can't make a statement.
Well, neither was I, but I mean,
let's move on now and look at the Sunday Independent. Now, everybody saw the story. It made big news right through the whole week. It says, inside Kenya's varsity of death. Now, shocking details have come out from the survivors of how the Al-Shabaab gunmen actually first taunted and then terrorized their victims before killing them. Survivors have told of their terrible ordeal during the siege that killed 148 people. 142 of them were students. Now, we do have a crossing. We're going to be finding out what's happening in Kenya on the latest on the story. But, Pen, I just want to hear your views. The worst terror attack now in history, in any learning institution in the history of Africa. What should this attack make us take note of? Prof, let's start.
Well, I think, politically, the first question, to say it's a human tragedy is stating the obvious, but I guess politically, President Kenyatta will be under some pressure. There will be a debate about whether governments can stop this kind of thing happening. I suppose the argument of those who say governments can prevent this sort of thing happening would be that you should have had intelligence which shows you, told you that was going to happen. But of course, we've seen around the world that that's very difficult. I think it may also raise questions in Kenya about their role in Somalia, because this has happened because they are fighting Al-Shabaab in Somalia. But of course, a lot of that will be cancelled out by a very legitimate wave of sympathy for people who simply gunned down because they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Now, what shocks me here is that, Dominic, apparently there were warnings provided about this terror attack and they were put all over the varsity, but everybody thought it was an April Fool's joke.
Yeah, that's a very sad moment for Kenya, especially when reports started coming up that there were intelligence reports, warning about such an attack. But Kenya is facing a very difficult situation there. Its neighbor, I mean, you've got a group of fundamentalists whose role is to simply outclass each other in terms of their brutality. So if you are dealing with people whose mission is to kill, I mean, how do you respond from that? I mean, it's a very, very difficult situation that President Kenyatta finds himself in. But he will have to rally his nation behind him and find a solution. But the solution will be difficult. Yeah.
Panel, let's just go back again to the Sunday Times. There was also right next to the headline, Kwecha killed Lolly. Right next to it, it says Zuma pressured Cosatu to take hard line. Now, basically, this piece claims that the sacking of Vavi had the blessing of the president, and apparently he said this during an ANC's National Executive Committee meeting 2 days before Vavi got sacked. Dominique?
No, I think, I mean, even though the story doesn't give more details into it, but if Zuma indeed said these words, I mean, it's concerning because there should be some independence between the ANC and the alliance. But be as it may, I mean, something had to give at the end. Whether Zuma was going to intervene or not, Cosatu had to take a decision.
And we're still going to look into further details on that when we look at the inside stories, because there's another very interesting story on the very same paper on page 17, and it actually tells about how the politics are at play when it comes to who gets sacked and who doesn't. Professor, go ahead.
I mean, with respect to the author and to Dominic, if you actually read the article, what the headline says is not what the article says. Okay.
Why, Prof?
What happened was, according to this, and apparently Zizi Kodwa has confirmed it, the president said at the NEC that Cosatu ought to sort out its differences, which Gwede Mantashe said, which Cyril Ramaphosa said. Now, if you say something like that, it doesn't necessarily mean fire Vavi. It may mean get yourself into a room and stop behaving like children and sort this thing out. So I don't think this proves presidential involvement. One of the interesting stories in the Cosatu issue is the extent to which you've had the Deputy President and the Secretary General of the ANC saying repeatedly to Cosatu, you ought to solve this problem rather than simply throw people out. And the faction in Cosatu, which is now dominant, has just ignored them. So to me, the really interesting story is if COSATU is supposed to be an ally of the ANC, if people who follow COSATU President Stumo Dlamini are supporters of the ANC, why do they pay absolutely no attention to the Secretary General and Deputy President of the ANC? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think we need to probe that.
And I think the President's words there were that, why are people dealing with people that are obviously hell-bent on causing further divisions within the Federation, Dominique?
No, I think, Prof is right. COSATU had to deal with its problems. But the issue here that ANC showed leadership. ANC moved in to try and help them to find that solution. But now COSATU politics, inside politics within COSATU are so messed up that even if you come in there with a perfect plan on how to solve this thing, I think the politics within COSATU are so negative that it's difficult to come up with a solution.
But then let's argue on that point. Then why would you say that headline is misleading then, Professor?
Well, I think conclusions are being drawn which are not supported by the story. If he'd actually said, look, we need to get these troublemakers out, that would be a legitimate story. Yeah. He said fix up the problem. And there are various ways in which you can fix up the problem. Incidentally, Dominic says correctly, the politics are complicated. I think a very interesting story which nobody's picked up here is the role of the South African Communist Party. And I say that because if you go on to Umsebenzi Online, which is the SACP website, you see continual attacks on one faction in COSATU. They cheered very loudly when UMSA was thrown out of COSATU. So the SACP continually is saying publicly, we think there ought to be a split in COSATU. And I think the tension between the SACP on the one hand and the ANC leadership on the other hand is very interesting here.
Very interesting. We're going to talk more on that story when we come back, but stay tuned for more Media Monitor shortly after this break.
Get your issue of Evoke magazine at sabcevoke.co.za or download the app on iOS or Android and immerse yourself in our world.
You can't have a gut feeling about other people's gut feeling.
Ngaba has continued the tradition of passing stories onto the next generation using a platform that offers stories to a far more greater audience.
Zombie no go unless you tell them to go.
This is what the audiences all over the world knew Fela Kuti for.
Join Musam Khalipi on Afro Showbiz every Saturday at 19:30 CH.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. If you've just joined us, our guests in studio are Mr. Stephen Friedman, a political analyst, and Mr. Dominic Mahlangu, deputy editor of The Times. Well, there are also other interesting stories that don't necessarily make the front pages. Let's have a look at them now. Panel, just to continue off our last conversation there, the Sunday Times with page 17 there, a marriage of convenience, founders on the rock of politics. Now, it is a continuation of the story. This article basically compares how former COSATU President Willem Madisha, and it also makes a comparison as to how he became ousted, largely because Vavi supporters had more members. Now, it also suggests that the Vavi supporters had more numbers, and political ties of whoever is in question go a long way to what actually becomes of them in the Federation. Let's expand on that point, Dominique.
No, I think it's, if I can use these words, it's the same script but different
Look
actors.
At the picture there.
Yeah, it's the same script, different actors. And I can tell you that maybe 10 years later, COSATU will be in the same situation where someone will have to be kicked out of COSATU using the numbers and the factions. That's the unfortunate thing, that COSATU now finds itself in the same cycle because of how Willem Madisha was kicked out of COSATU and how Vavi was kicked out of COSATU. You can actually see that thread. I mean, there are similarities.
Professor?
Yes, I agree. I think it is an important comparison to make. And if you look at the story, you'll see that one of the similarities between what happened then and what happened now is that the opinion of members of COSATU has not been taken seriously. What happened in the Madisha case is he won an election. Delegates elected by workers elected him president of COSATU. There's a point here in the story that he may not have won if the Western Cape delegation hadn't have left early. That's true, but in the end, that was the election result. Now, we have a situation this time where it hasn't even gone to the members of COSATU. The Central Executive Committee, which has been taking the lead in this whole process, is made up of general secretaries and presidents of unions. The Congress is made up of delegates directly elected by workers. So twice now you have a situation in which a particular side has driven out its opponents, but without actually bothering to ask the members of the organization, and that may come back to haunt them. So it is a very important parallel to draw, I think.
All right, let's move on. We still have a COSATU segment, gentlemen. I want to hear more of those views there. But let's look at the City Press's page 2 now. It says Ria Pierre is facing recommendations from 4 reports saying that she should face remedial action. Your views on this, Dominique?
I mean, from day one, when President Zuma brought her to head the police, she had a tough time. I mean, this latest headline simply confirms that I think the entire police force, I mean, I can say that they are not happy with her leadership. But now, with this story coming up in the Marikana, that's where the cracks, the visible cracks started showing. And it's unfortunate that she has never had any support, especially from the ANC itself.
What do you make of this, especially after the Marikana report, Professor?
Well, the problem, of course, Alicia, is that we haven't seen the Marikana report yet. I'm always a bit nervous when reporters approach me, etc., about commenting on leaks. Because what happens if somebody is just, and this happens in our politics in this country, somebody is playing games, and that's not what the Farnham Commission report says. However, whatever the Farnham Commission report says, I think that we can be pretty assured that in the wake of that report, there will be pressure on government to show that people in the police are being held accountable for what happened in Marikana. Now, if indeed what the City Press says is the case, one of the things you may see happening is people saying, well, yes, of course, the National Police Commissioner should be accountable, but who else should be accountable? So I think whether the story is accurate or not, I think that when the Farnham Commission report is released, we can expect to see some serious pressure on the police and on government to convince us that whoever was responsible for killing people at Marikana has been forced to pay a political price.
Let's move on now and look at City Press's page 4. It says the former minister is denying claims that he was used as a go-between in the Zuma corruption case. Panel, your views on this story?
My take is that the more the former minister tries to explain himself, the more there are other questions. I mean, this whole saga, I think, is only the courts that will give us a clear picture. Because of here, you're dealing with the so-called intelligence reports, people who are eavesdropping on phone calls and all of that. So it's not clear where the truth lies. But the more the minister, in my view, tries to explain what happened before Polokwane and after Polokwane, I mean, there are more questions that are coming out.
And still looking at the police, gentlemen, let's look at the Sunday Times' is page 10 there. It says, a prayer for fallen comrades and a fistful of ammunition for the late night patrol. Well, police officers in the story are basically telling about the ordeal and their fears during being on duty and how they sometimes fear for their lives. We've seen the latest worrying statistics on how police are brutally killed during working hours. About 85 of them have been killed in the past 2 months. What are your views on this, Professor?
Well, it's obviously important that we remember that, given our history, people are rightly very nervous about the police, given the role the police played in South Africa in the past. On the other hand, we need to bear in mind presently that police are human beings trying to do a job, trying to protect the citizens of South Africa, and that they are under pressure. I think what is important in this situation is that we don't fall into the trap which is sometimes set of saying, well, because this happens to police officers, we must now have huge powers for the police and they must be allowed to do all sorts of things which are contrary to the Constitution. I don't think that would solve the problem. If you look at some other countries, there are other countries in which police don't obey human rights standards and they still get killed. So I think it's very important that that happens. Just one point because you didn't come on the Casserole story, which I think is worth throwing in. I appreciate it's difficult. Isn't it important, though, to perhaps suggest to the media on this issue that some investigative journalism here would be a good idea? Because really all this says, and I think Dominic's right, there is pressure on former Minister Casseroles and justifiably so. But really all we're reading about at the moment is affidavits handed into court. And yes, that is important, but if you've got some really good investigative journalists out there, I think there's a very important story waiting to be written.
We really need to know. Dominic, what could be the possible story emanating from that angle?
No. I think as journalists, we need to go back. And trace exactly the relationship between Casseroles, the NPA, and the former president Thabo Mbeki. That is why I say that we'll never arrive at the exact truth up until the matter goes to court. And I can tell you that this matter is not going to court. It's never going to court because of people are simply playing games here. People are strictly playing games because of they will push the matter up until court and then withdraw, and then there will be some kind of a commission and all of that. For me, I think that if this matter, we as a country, we need to know the truth. The truth lies in the court, and the court, it will mean that dragging also the current president to come in and explain himself.
And looking at, let's compare these two stories. Ria Pierre to take the fall for Marikana and police brutality at work. What do you make? Can you not marry those two stories and find one link between the two, Professor?
Well, you can marry the stories, and there will be people who will say, well, what happened at Marikana is that there have been 10 deaths beforehand and that the police were simply protecting themselves. But I think most people who've studied policing will agree that there are ways of protecting yourself which do not involve gunning down 34 people. So I think that conclusion will be drawn, but as I say, it's very important to make the point. Yes, there was violence at Marikana before the killings, but there are police methods which enable you to deal with that without the bloodshed we saw, and I think we need to keep on reminding ourselves of that.
Gentlemen, let's also look at the City Press's page 8. KwaZulu-Natal's Righteous Week of Hate. Now, this is basically about the King's speech and what he said when he was saying that the foreigners should pack up and quickly move back to where they came from. Your views, Dominique?
It's unfortunate that the King had to go that route.
But wasn't it taken out of context? Because there was an explanation afterwards that was given on what the King actually meant with those comments. Dominique?
Whether there was an explanation or not, but for a king to find himself in the middle, of that story, because I did not get the actual clip in terms of him talking in Zulu, because of there are problems there when you send a journalist who's not even fluent in Zulu, then you will misread what the king is saying. But be as it may, we've seen what has happened after the king spoke.
But that's no excuse, Dominique. You can't send somebody who will not be able to write a proper story based on facts and make that excuse and say that it was misconstrued.
I think it's upon news editors to make sure that if they send their journalists to do a story, especially a story that involves a king, you need to send someone there who knows Zulu, because of chances is that the king will speak in Zulu. So that we don't find ourselves in this situation. Because throughout the week I was actually confused. Did the king say it or not?
Look, what the king did say, according to this report, is foreigners should pack up their belongings and go back to their countries. And I think there's something very important here. Yes, what he was saying in the Zulu might have had a different nuance, etc. We've had a pattern in this country for many years now in which senior figures, not only Kings Welatini, senior politicians of all stripes, say things about foreigners which give the impression that foreigners are a massive problem. And bear in mind, these are it's not all foreigners, it's foreigners from other African countries. And then the impression is created that these people are a problem, and then people use violence, and then the politicians or the king or whoever it is throws up their hands and they say, it's not my problem, I didn't cause that. You have to watch what you say. In this country, given the violence we've had against people from elsewhere in Africa, even if all he meant was that somebody should pass a law, you have to be very careful about what you say, because and you must take responsibility for what you said. We have far too much anti-immigrant sentiment in this country, and it leads to violence.
And somebody was saying that how would these utterances actually affect other South African nationals in other countries?
Yeah, that is why I say that it's unfortunate that the king find himself in the middle of this thing. Because of now, look what is happening in some parts of KZN, where foreigners have been chased out of the communities. And the king simply says, I didn't say it. I mean, why would even newspapers go with such a story? I mean, I agree with Prof here to say that in this country, we need a law that will say that you can't be saying such statements. But unfortunately, even the president has been quiet about this matter. Hopefully. I would have expected that all the parties, including the president, will come out and say, look, the king is wrong and the king needs to apologize. The first thing that the king said, I'm not going to apologize.
Yeah, well, maybe the king says because he didn't say it in that context. So we don't know how long this battle is going to last. Well, we'll have more Media Monitor after this short break. You can go on Twitter and Facebook and leave your comments on the following stories.
Get the scoop on what really happens at the SABC, straight from us. Read our cover story to experience the world through the eyes of Bonang Mateba. Get to know the fresh faces of our new primetime telenovela Uzalo. And join in the 50th birthday celebrations of Mungana Lonene FM and Palapala FM. All in the latest issue of Evoke magazine. Don't miss out. Get yours at sabcevoke.co.za or download the app and stand a chance of winning a double ticket to the 2015 Belgian Grand Prix.
This is Media Monitor. Welcome back. Well, according to COSATU's internal financial report, more than 5 million rand has been utilized by the Federation in legal fees. The report states that the staggering amount was used mainly to fight the Union Federation's factional battles, and only a fraction of that amount was spent on its members. Now, earlier this week, the Federation expelled its General Secretary, Zwelinzima Vavi, which was followed by the swift resignation of its national spokesperson, Mr. Patrick Craven. Let's have a look at this clip as it says why Vavi was expelled.
COSATU took a decision on the 7th of November 2014 to expel NUMSA for violating the policies and the constitution of COSATU. The General Secretary boycotted a press conference at which we're supposed to brief the public and the media about the decision. Didn't only do that, he then penned a letter, open letter, which was sent to affiliates and the media before we even could see that. Never attended a number of constitutional meetings of the Federation, but not only that, went public on why he didn't do that, literally undermining the very organization which employs him and has elected him. The CEC took a dim view of that particular situation and did not immediately act, but asked for Vavi to come and explain himself at the Central Executive Committee meeting why he is doing that. You will know that in the meeting that took place on the 3rd and 4th of March, he didn't come, but instead told the public why he didn't come. And thereafter, he convened yet other meetings, attended certain meetings outside the structures of the organization and literally dividing the unions of COSATU. For him to come and explain why he does what he is doing, you are now aware that on Sunday he went at large, pulling everything upside down in as far as COSATU is concerned, and literally defying and actually saying that he doesn't care whether we fire him or not for defying COSATU the manner he did. So the meeting took that decision based on those acts of misconduct by the General Secretary.
Do send us your views concerning this particular topic. Now, panel, do you think the latest report in the Sunday Times actually supports the allegations of political interference in the Vavi COSATU saga? Prof?
Well, as I say, I don't think on its own it does. I mean, there may be other information which people have. I mean, one source of political interference in this. Look, it's a bit problematic to talk about political interference. I mean, it's not as if COSATU is not some sort of sports club or whatever. It's an ally of the governing party, so one would expect political people to play a political role. The interesting question, which I've raised before, is the contrast between what the South African Communist Party says about this issue and what the ANC says about this issue. If you look at the Communist Party's website, Msebenzi Online, they seem to be quite happy with the idea of a split in COSATU. When NUMSA was expelled, they said it was all NUMSA's fault, it was a correct decision, etc. The ANC Secretary General, Gwede Mantashe, and the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, took the opposite view and said, look, it's a disaster for COSATU. So I think what seems to be happening, judging from what we see by public statements, is the SACP taking one view and the leadership of the ANC taking another view. Whether this is what caused the issue is another matter, because I think the problem for Mr. Ramaphosa and the problem for Mr. Mantashe is that, the clip was of Stumo Dlamini, the current president. His grouping doesn't seem to pay terribly much attention at the moment to anything that Mr. Ramaphosa or Mr. Mantashe say about this. In fact, Stumo Dlamini, who's supposed to be doing this because he wants to support the ANC leadership, in effect told Mantashe to keep quiet and said, this has got nothing to do with you. So I find it very interesting that the senior leadership of the ANC is being marginalized on this issue.
Dominic?
Yeah, my take is that first let's start with the politics within COSATU. They are so toxic that it was bound to happen. Because I think COSATU has reached a point now in its history that it'll have to choose another political direction. I think those tensions came to the fore. I mean, in the past 4 years, because of COSATU needed to take a direction. But NUMSA, Vavi, and others were simply saying that we can't continue to be just a voting fodder for the ANC, just to be used just towards the elections to bring in numbers and all of that. So COSATU, Vavi, NUMSA, and others were simply saying that let's have a bigger voice in terms of how the state is run. But on the other hand, the ANC still maintain this whole concept of saying that it's a leader of the alliance. So where do you draw the line when the leader of the alliance needs you, especially when it comes to elections? And you know that COSATU used to have that voting bloc. So in a way that I would say that COSATU needed to find its feet. And I think with these divisions, we're beginning to see another COSATU that will shape the coming years for workers. But the unfortunate part of it is that in all our discussions, even with the Prof now, is that there's no mention of the word worker. It's all about politics. And now it's a question of what is the role of COSATU now?
Which brings me to my next question, Dominique. People are very concerned about what's happening to the actual workers' rights, because there's findings on the COSATU's internal financial report that a substantial amount of money has been indeed spent on members rather than the actual workers. Prof?
What the report says, and it illustrates Dominique's very important point. What the report says is that 5 million has been spent on legal action. That 5 million rand is money which is put into COSATU every month by working people who put that money in because they expect to be protected at work and they expect their interests to be looked after at work. They don't give that money for people to go and sue each other and conduct political battles on their behalf. So really this is a very clear example of the extent to which leadership seem to be interested in their own issues and not what they were put there for, which is to champion working people. I think the way this is going to develop, whatever is said at the moment, is that we probably are going to see 2 union federations now. I think that this group that's supporting NUMSA will break away. Now, in the short term, that may well be a problem for working people because if you have this kind of competition, you always have the threat of violence. In the longer term, it may actually be a plus for workers because if you have 2 groups actually competing for you, then actually they have to take you seriously. They have to listen to your concerns. So it might be, I mean, the threat of violence is real and we need to worry about it. But it might be the first time in some years that working people actually get taken seriously.
Very interesting that you mentioned that the threat of violence is very much out there. Professor, if you've seen the news, the reactions by the workers this whole week has been to divided opinions. Let's look at what some people at home, our viewers, are saying on this topic. Spiro in KZN says, workers are the last thing on their minds. Cabinet entrepreneurs is an end game. Figile majola, senzeni zokwana, zet luzipo on it. Peter M.A. says, so scandalous about current crop of leadership in COSATU. DJ Shawnee B says the ANC needs to help itself out first before even attempting to help COSATU. What do you make of those views?
Yeah, that is why I say that it's unfortunate. The ANC needs COSATU, but there are problems within COSATU, and the ANC will have to live with it. Because of COSATU will have to find its own footing going forward. Because of the so-called politics within COSATU, you've got Ivan Jim, you've got Stumodla, I mean, believing in 2 different politics. So you cannot have such people in the same room trying to pull, in the same direction. That's where the problem is. And the ANC will have to live with it.
All right, gentlemen, that's where we leave it. And when Media Monitor returns, we're going to analyze the deadly attack of the Al-Shabaab group in Kenya. Stay tuned for that and more after the break.
Healthy food is not always the cheapest food option. And so making the healthy choices, the easier choices, remain a health challenge for South African children.
Bipolar disorder is said to affect 1 in 100 people.
Low back pain, the most common spinal disorder, affects about 8 out of 10 people at some point in their lives.
Back pain persists for more than a week or 2. Seek advice.
I'm Dr. Cyril Daoud. Watch Health Talk every Saturday on SABC.
Welcome back. Well, 5 people are in custody following the Al-Shabaab attack in eastern Kenya this week, which left almost 150 people dead. The Somali militant group has threatened to carry out more attacks in Kenya. Let's now welcome our reporter, Sarah Kimani, who joins us on the line from Nairobi in Kenya. Sarah, a very good morning to you. Please tell us, how is the country coping with this whole ordeal? We hear that President Kenyatta has declared 3 days of national mourning.
Yeah, good morning, Alicia. So today what will be happening is that Kenyans will be gathering in their various places of worship to begin the 3 days of national mourning. It now emerges that one of the attackers was a trained lawyer who actually worked at a local bank for some time before he disappeared. It also emerges that security officers, it took too long to deploy security officers. So Kenyans are now starting to get angry. Initially, they were united in grief, and a lot of them were, disheartened, and they thought that it was bad that Kenya had been attacked again. But now a lot of people getting angry with the government and feeling that much more needs to be done by the Kenyan government, not just to secure the borders, but to ensure that if something like this happens, then the effect and the pain is quelled faster than it happened this time around.
Sarah, we understand that some of the gunmen were either killed or captured. How far are the investigations now?
Well, we understand that the man is helping them with investigations. Incidentally, yesterday, the bodies of the attackers were paraded in Garissa town for residents to be able to look at them and identify. Remember, President Kenyatta said yesterday in his address that the reason why it has become so difficult to be able to deal with these attacks is because some of these people are embedded within the Kenyan, he said, and I quote, the Kenyan Muslim community. But you realize that most of them are probably recent converts, some of them. Others are young people who have been duped into going to Somalia to train alongside the Al-Shabaab militants, and then they return to Kenya to attack their own people here at home.
Sarah, we also understand that some of the alleged perpetrators were actually paraded naked in front of everybody. I mean, we know that there's much anger amongst Kenyans, but really, isn't this likely to lead to more retributions by the Al-Shabaab militants? I mean, we know that they have promised to up their attacks. And has the Kenyan government stepped up anything in terms of security?
I think the reasoning of the government and the security officers when they paraded the bodies is for the residents of Garissa to be able to say if they know these people or if they can be able to help. Because what has been happening is it has been very difficult for the Kenyan government to get mothers or fathers or brothers or, relatives to say that their son has gone missing and he could actually be in Somalia training alongside the militants. So the idea for them is to try and get them to speak. However, like you say, it could also, depending on the people, it could lead to, a counter. It could be counterproductive. People could also say, oh, they all come from this community or they're all from this religion. So it is a very dicey situation. Inside the other parts of the country, you can see security has been heightened. But as I speak to you, I'm right outside a very big institution here, but I don't see any officers. Because also I think the government finds its security officers have not been spread thin. Just after the attack, President Kenyatta said that 10,000 recruits who had been stopped from joining college will immediately begin deployment into the college for training.
Now, Sarah, how are the millions of Kenyan Muslims, including Somali refugees, responding to this?
Yesterday, there was a demonstration in one of the neighborhoods here, dominated by members of the Somali community, where there's also a very big population of refugees, and they held placards and held protests in the streets of Italy to say that they did not support what had happened in Garissa. Earlier in the day, the Kenyan Muslim community leadership called a press conference also to condemn the attack. We've also seen them coming out in huge numbers to do donations towards the families of those who've been affected. In Garissa, we saw Muslim mothers, consoling the young ladies or young men who were being rescued from the school. So there's a lot of people uniting, at least towards together. But now where they may differ is on how best they think the government should have dealt with the situation.
And Sarah, before I let you go, is the curfew still imposed in the eastern parts of Kenya? What's happening with security there?
You can notice heightened security. You can notice patrols in a major bus stops, in a supermarket. But the problem, and this is what a lot of people are saying, especially on social media, where you can see a hashtag We Are One and Garissa attacks, which are the trending topics. You can hear a lot of people complaining that after a week, these will be forgotten and the streets will be empty again. You will not be able to see officers, and the country will move back to normal. So they want to see these situations being the same because, according to them, Kenya is a country at war, so it must remain on high alert throughout.
Thank you so much for that. That's Sarah Kimani, our East Africa correspondent, giving us a first-hand account as to what's currently happening in Kenya about the Garissa attacks. Now, panel, very quickly, I just want to hear your views on this story, Professor, before we go.
Look, I think the only good news which is coming out of this incident so far is the fact that the Kenyan population is acting with a great deal more maturity at the moment than the American population did in a similar situation. Because as you pointed out in your questions, there is a sizable Muslim population in Kenya. There is a significant Somali refugee population. And it would have been dreadful, but it would have been a human response to say this is the fault of the Muslims and the Somalis. So what seems to be happening is that, as we said earlier, there's a debate about whether government could do better. And that's a very politically responsible approach. So I think that in a very horrible attack, the response of the Kenyan people, I think, has been very impressive.
Dominique?
No, I think the president of Kenya, in terms of his statement, is clear. He's simply saying, let's isolate the fundamentalist. And let us not simply come up with one brush and say that Muslims are against Kenyans. Because of, especially in the eastern part of Kenya, where it's about 150 km from the university to Somalia, I mean, they share a lot. In terms of culture, in terms of marriages and all of that. So it will be in fact sad if Kenya will have to come up with statements that says we're being attacked by Muslims. But I think that, as Professor says, that it's encouraging coming out of Kenya to say that we're going to isolate the fundamentalist.
Which should be what should be happening in South Africa when it comes to xenophobic attacks. Well, let's look at our final entertainment story. This Media Monitor, it says South Africa's funny man Trevor Noah is making waves internationally as the new host of The Daily Show, taking over from Jon Stewart. Let's take a look at this clip.
Hospitals. I'm not a fan. I had to go back for my surgery, voice surgery, one of the most stressful days of my life. I'm there at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm sitting in the waiting area. There's a woman who checks you in for your surgery. She's not friendly at all. She's not even trying to make people feel good. She's like, next! Next! It's my turn. I get there. She's like, name? Trevor. Trevor. Say name? Noah. Noah. Noah? Trevor Noah? Yes. Trevor Noah? Yes. The comedian. The one who's making the jokes, eh? Yeah. Jokes about us when we're on strike, eh? No, not that one. Not that one. It's another one. It's not me. It's another one. It's like, yeah. Yeah, you are here now, eh? It's not funny now, eh? That's not funny. Not funny. Like, yeah. Where's your jokes now? They're in the car. Eh? Nothing. Funny guy. So what you want here? Eh? You got a surgery? Why are you talking like that? What's wrong? Oh, the voice is broken. Eh? Did you break something? We pull him, eh? What's wrong? It's sore. Oh, I'm sorry. It's sore. Oh, you want the medicine? Okay, let me just check. Oh, they say laughter is the best medicine. Eh? Yeah. So why don't you just make a joke and fix that? Eh? Yeah, just make a joke inside, funny guy, eh? Funny. Even me, I can do it for you. I can make a joke, eh? I can fix that. Knock, knock. Who's there? Nobody.
Personally, I just want to high-five Trevor. Well done, and keep flying the South African flag very high. Very quickly, panel, your views before we go. What do you think will be making big headlines this coming week? We've got RIA facing a possible axe. We've got the developments in Kwecha. We've got lots of things, as well as Eskom. Dominique, let's start with you very quickly.
I mean, the last item that you pointed out, Eskom, I think we're still going to see more stories coming out of it. And COSATU, Because of now, we want to see Vavi and his team, what are they going to do, and the response of the ANC. And then also just to check whether the president is going to make the Marikana Commission report public or not.
Thank you for that. Professor, very quickly.
No, I agree. I think that this, I think of the list Dominic's mentioned, there will be pressure building up on the president to release that report, and rightly so, because South Africans need to see that report. And yeah, I think that the Kusatu story will continue to dominate. And of course, it's not only ESCOM, it's also some of the other institutions, SARS, etc. Because what we seem to be having in those
Let's leave it there,
institutions-
Professor. We've unfortunately run out of time, but thank you both of you for being here today. Well, it is that time again when I have to remind our viewers that your contributions and suggestions are highly valued. And to engage with us, you can follow us on Twitter at SA Media Monitor. Share your views and comments on Facebook. Go to www.facebook.com/Media Monitor and click like on our page. You can also email us your views about the show. Our email address hasn't changed. It's mediamonitor@sabc.co.za. Once again, thank you so much for watching Media Monitor. Do join us again next week. And in case you missed this live show, remember you can still catch a repeat tomorrow morning at 2 a.m. Alternatively, go to our SABC YouTube link on www.youtube.com/SABC News. The professor will be watching as well. From myself, Alicia Jali, and the rest of the QTIV team, and my panelists, have yourself a blessed Sunday. Goodbye.